Hey folks, it's George Leoniak at New Geometry here. I'm here with another video. This one I've entitled Drunvalo's Dodecahedron is not ancient. So I just want to illustrate this. I have some slides set up for everyone, a couple quotes from Drunvalo's book, just so you know who Drunvalo is. I really love his work. This, of course, is one of the most inspirational. People get started with The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life by Drunvalo Melchizedek. And it gets many people inspired, and many authors and things on the web continue to reference this material. I just want to point out within it, though, in my slideshow that there's a story in there that describes when the dodecahedron, as he's illustrated it, was created. So let's go over to the slide share here. And, you know, the way he describes it in his book, just so you know, it was published in the 1990s. And it was through a series of lectures that were given through 1984 to the late 90s. So there's information that's been updated within it. But he describes in the book that, you know, during one of his workshops, one of the students were there, and they pointed out, because he'd been looking for the dodecahedron for about 20 years, he had said. So after the 20-year search of looking for the dodecahedron in Metatrons Cube, a student pointed out, had you tried connecting these lines before? And I'm guessing that was in the 1970s or 80s, I'm not sure. But then he discovered a view of the dodecahedron, or a shape that looked like the dodecahedron. And, you know, I think it's important to realize that, you know, even though it's in a book called The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, doesn't mean that, you know, throughout history, people have been drawing this dodecahedron. And the reason I'm doing this video is, in my other videos, I've illustrated that the dodecahedron in that diagram really is kind of it doesn't continue to blossom within the other patterns. You can't really build off it because of the phi ratio is not accurately represented there. And, you know, I also want to illustrate that so much of the work from this wonderful guide here that Drunvalo gave us with fantastic information is continually used. You know, the Metatrons Cube, the Flower of Life, great geometer teachers continue to post this really kind of maybe without checking it out, to make sure that our sacred geometry is going to show the true forms as if they were a template of creation, that any geometer in the future would be able to build from those. This is more, as I've said, more of an artistic representation of something that looks like it has pentagonal faces, but the phi ratio is not in it. And just a quote from Drunvalo's book in the same section on 164, the missing lines. He says, right underneath his description of it, he says that, this is one of the greatest problems in science, believing you have solved the problem, then moving on and using that information to build on. Science now having to deal with the same kind of problem around falling bodies in a vacuum. For example, it has always been assumed that they fell at the same rate, and much of our higher science is based on this fundamental law. It's been proven wrong, yet science continues using it. Spinning ball falls much faster than a non-spinning one. Someday there will be a scientific day of reckoning. So, I mean, in his own write-up, just underneath the missing lines, you know, he's kind of giving us the antidote for that, really, to say, hey, well, we don't, you know, maybe we don't want to continue to bring forth this dodecahedron, maybe showing that it's not going to really build the dodecahedron will get us set off in a way that we just don't continue to repeat this minor error, which is, you know, really spread throughout the world of sacred geometry. This is the way people see the dodecahedron often depicted. And, you know, it's only 40 years old in how it's spread so rapidly as that representation. So maybe there's some alternative views. And in order to do that, I'm going to go through some slides here to show what an alternative view may be, and also clearly show, if you don't know why, this is also from Metatrons Cube, distorts phi ratio forms. And I love Metatron and I love all the Metatron stuff. I don't have a problem with that at all. It's not that big of a deal to me like it might be for some other people. But, at least for me, I think that we can do a better job in our representation. So here's our pentagon faces that would be a normal equal edged pentagon with 108-degree angles on the interior angle. And this is an orthogonal projection. If you go on Wikipedia, all the drawings that they show you for every type of form, whether it's 4D or 5D or whatever type of form, they're from this orthogonal projection, which really means that it's eliminating the perspective that would distort the form as you're looking at it through our binocular vision. As things recede, they get, the perspective comes into play, and there's foreshortening of the edges. And really, one of my most common complaints in the other videos that I get from this video, and all of the other one is called Metatrons Cube, doesn't contain all 5 platonic solids. That's got about 1,000 views on it. That's my earliest one on this work. My most common, objection to what it is that I'm sharing is, well, this is just a perspective drawing, okay? Well, first of all, let's just point out that this would be possibly due to perspective because the front edge is closer and the back edge is smaller. So, these aren't going to line up as a 1-for-1. So if this is 1 inch across the width of the pentagon, this would be 0.618 at the bottom edge. So maybe we have that distortion going on. Well, recently, one of the great young geometers in my new geometers group, KNEW Geometers over at Facebook, Lukey Poole, he's always posting great stuff in there, very much into this, really has a strong background in mathematics and a love for the sacred geometry application. He posted these recently. I asked him if I could use them in this video because he, in one of my posts, I did talk about this perspective, and he, luckily, for me, crafted a version of a perspective drawing that, this really depends on how far away you are from the object, of course, but let's just say this is an average distance. That, if this is a perspective drawing in Metatrons Cube, and this were the perspective drawing of how it might look for maybe 4 or 5 feet away, or 3 feet of looking at a dodecahedron, well, we could clearly see that this perspective drawing in Metatrons Cube is not going to be due to the perspective. So, I think what we might just have to come to terms with here is that it's trying to put this in here so it nicely fits as like a nice package that we could say Metatrons Cube, being an archangel, giving us all the sacred geometry that his cube would give us all this. And it's nice to say that it would be these lines to connect, and these are the little cross pieces that the student of Drunvalos back in the 70s or 80s, I'm assuming, pointed out to him. And yes, this is the place where you have to find the correct distance to be able to create the dodecahedron, as I'll show you in a moment, except it doesn't have phi ratio. Now, it's not a perspective drawing, as I just pointed out. So really, it's just saying we could create something that looks like a dodecahedron here because it does create, 5-sided faces. But for one, it doesn't have phi. And the second is, if you were to construct this as a form, it wouldn't hold up in 3-dimensional space. So maybe it's time to adjust and kind of let go of that. But the problem I see with that is that, so much momentum has been established beyond to this iconography, really in the 40-year span since this has been published, has really taken over and blossomed into all other areas of New Age NEW spirituality, New Age NEW New Age, not KNEW age. But so much of that has blossomed into those that it's everywhere. So you have kind of a big cleanup job to do if it's worth cleaning up. I mean, if you really want sacred geometry to have some kind of blueprint of creation, then we have to kind of address things like this and maybe kind of say, hey, we might have made a little bit of a turn there that isn't representing the sacred eternal geometry the way it is talked about, because the words in Drunvalo's book, many of them are just so beautiful and bring so much depth and perspective of what sacred geometry is at such these core fundamental levels, and to just treat it as an evolution and a process that helped get awareness to this. But now we don't have to continue to reproduce this era over and over again for the foreseeable next 2,000, 3,000 years. So anyway, I've offered a lot of solutions, not to say that mine are going to be the only ones here, but at least I'm taking a stab at it and trying to see that there are patterns within the seed of life. And this is a modified version of a pattern I've shared quite a lot called the golden circle seed of life, because what I've done is I've introduced within our central circle 3 layers of phi ratio circles. And I'll show you what the complete pattern looks like in a moment. And these are the phi proportion circles that are also related to this inner one. And now this is when I draw the same lines connecting the equilateral triangles on the outside of it, also extending the outer line here to the inner circle, right? From the top of my large circle to the inner circle. No difference in the lines, but magically what happens here in that little crisscross section, that, this magic spot, when I divide the edge, compare the edges, let's say, in the ratio of phi proportion, then all of a sudden this orthogonal projection of a dodecahedron, if I take Lukey's drawing here and bring it over, well, now it's a fit, right? It actually is a blueprint. Now, if you were a builder of creation, and you wanted to, if you were an archangel who wanted to give humanity a blueprint, a template to work with, well, if you're a builder at a site, you're not going to give your construction crew projective drawings, because when they build that, it would be, things would be really big over here and really small, like those optical illusions that you can go into, and someone could be standing something that looks really big and they walk closer to you and then it was really tiny or something like that, right? No, you would give them something that would be a kind of accurate one-to-one, so that when you picked up the form afterwards, you would hold it in your hand and move it around, and it would look as it were, not exactly on paper, but the proportions on the paper would be replicable in your 3-dimensional reality. So, okay, so that's this version of this. Now, this is important because, as I've illustrated in many of my other videos, and Metatron's tetraplex is kind of my evolution of Metatrons Cube, because the tetraplex is and I have a little bit of that on the end, but not much. The tetraplex is a 4D icosahedron, which has 600 tetrahedral cells. And this correction of the dodecahedron, as I also illustrate in this video, now allows it to build off of one another. It's not a standalone drawing. It's like this is here. It doesn't really fit into any other pattern. Like I said, it's more, we could draw it. We could draw something that looks like a dodecahedron. But this dodecahedron on the right here will be able to kind of nest in other platonic solids. And now we've solved that nesting problem of how to get these all nested in a drawing from this perspective, the hexagon view, meaning the cube, tetrahedron, octahedron, the icosahedron, and the dodeca. They're all going to intermingle, but they're also doing the stellated forms. Now, this is a key point. The stellation of this diagram here, these gray lines that are extending off the pentagonal faces here, are actually now the stellated, small stellated dodecahedron. And this will become important in this video in just a little bit. Now, this also would want to do that. It would also be, you see, because it's doing the same lines in the same place. Remember, both of these drawings here only have 21 lines to draw, the same exact lines, just they're proportionally spaced differently, just enough to get that edge to maintain phi proportion within this. And then all of a sudden, this one creates the stellated dodecahedron, small stellated one. And this one that doesn't, it doesn't really do anything. It looks like a small stellated dodecahedron, but it doesn't have the back of the pentagon, the star that would be in here, because this would connect and make a star here, back here, 5-point star, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll show you what this looks like at an angle in just a minute. And this would go, 1, 2, 3, dead end, no star point at the back, because that's where it ends. It doesn't go through, it just ends right here. And that's the problem with the icosahedron in this view as well, because that is the icosahedron. This small stellated dodecahedron makes an icosahedron. If this is all a lot of lingo for you, I'll be illustrating this in just a moment. So really what I'm saying here as we continue on here is that, we're dealing with a roughly 30 to 40, 40-year expansion of sacred geometry in the consciousness, which is just phenomenal. And, it's really been that amount short of time that we start to see this being presented. So it's not ancient. It's not something that is going way, way back there just because the Egyptians and this flower of life diagram has been shown to be present in many other places and in many other cultures throughout history. Doesn't mean that they were all drawing this dodecahedron. It was really something that was discovered quite recently, and it looked like it fit. And then depending on how you want to use this, as I'm saying, if you like it like that, it looks cool and that works for you, great. I'm very happy for you. But if you want to potentially expand your capacity to work with sacred geometry in a way where we blossom the forms into new forms that we can work with and see how they interrelate together, then this will do that. And I've demonstrated in so many of my other videos as of recent how that is the case, and you'll see that in here as well. So let's see, this is what I was just talking about. That's the back edge of a regular icosahedron that has the 5-pointed star in it. It also has this 5-pointed star, and this is what the 5-pointed star of the same dimensions that we're looking at here, because these share this same edge lengths. These are just perspective now, basically being tilted over in both these cases. This is what it would look like as a pentagram star and the pentagon around it. And so here is the drawing that I've been showing you. There's our dodecahedron right over top of this. And there are two drawings on top of this. So I'm going to just remove this one so we can just see that I just enlarged. That was the previous one we're looking at. But then here's our icosahedron. And the reason I wanted to illustrate that is that when you do your 5-pointed star inside the icosahedron, because the inside of the icosahedron basically has 5-pointed stars that are inside those pentagons. But when you make that 5-pointed star, what happens here is you create the face of the dodecahedron. So that's why I had this on here before, just to show you that this dodecahedron is created through that process. I think in my previous slide, I did say that, that's really the relatively common way that I've seen illustrated in other books, is that they will draw. It's not like no one was drawing a dodecahedron accurately. What they often did was draw an icosahedron first through various different techniques. I've never seen the golden circle seed of life done the way that I do it, but they would generally draw two phi ratio circles. They'd make a hexagon, and then they would go in and kind of draw the stellated version of the dodecahedron, and while doing that stellation, they would get this pentagonal face. Now I can do that pentagonal face of the dodecahedron without having to do the icosahedron at all. So there's a little bit more versatility there, rather than always having to start off with the icosahedron to draw the dodeca first. So here's just the full pattern of what I call the golden circle seed of life pattern. It has 21 circles. So we have 3 layers of 7, right? So we have the inner circles here. They're all 7 of those, 7 of the medium-sized circles, and 7 of the large circles. So we have a 777, and I know some of you really love the numerology that's associated with this, but I like to say that this has kind of got a little 7-7 resonance going on with it. But what is this pattern really? Like, why is it coming about now? Like, why was this was really kind of easy after a while. It wasn't easy for me to discover, but after I started work with it, I was like, wow, why didn't we just do this a long time ago? Like, why wasn't this inscribed in some sort of, ancient temple in the past and putting in the phi ratio? Well, I think for one, mostly we love the idea of not changing our compass radius. If we do it all at the same compass, which the flower of life is, well, then it's nice to say that everything is unified because we only have to use one size circle. You introduce, the possibility of imperfection and error if you do change your compass radius when you get that phi proportion circle. But if it's spread out over the whole pattern, your drawings are still going to look amazing and the forms are going to look accurate. But hey, that's just maybe a little bit more true to life, that it won't be all 100% perfect, in its representation of how it's presented. So, because there needs to be that variety for the evolution to occur. So, way back in one of these videos that I did, I think it was last summer, I did a video called "It's Sacred Geometry at All Scales." Thank God. And in that video, I speculate about a number of things. And I said, these are going to be some of the trails that I'm going to follow out. I don't know how they're going to present themselves in the future, but I'm quite curious about them at the time. I came across an image from 2019, and I love the timing of these things and how they coincide to the field of sacred geometry that's happening and coinciding at the same time. I saw this image then, and this is the same one. This is the first photograph ever captured of quantum entanglement. And this is bringing us into the quantum world and what Albert Einstein called, action at a, spooky action at a distance, where, something can happen to an electron over here, and the electron, far, far away would experience that same change. How could that be? But this is the first photograph that we actually had of it in 2019. Maybe it was taken before that date. So these are connected via their quantum states, even across vast distances. And I looked at that image, and this is really when I just started working with the golden circles, which I call, phi ratio circles, meaning if this diameter here is 1 inch, the red circle in the middle will be 0.618. And I like to overlay images, as I know many people who are on my Facebook group love to overlay a lot of my drawings and other people's drawings on top to see what might, present itself when we start to combine pure sacred geometry as I present it here with some of these more naturally occurring things that are happening around us, even if we can't see them. So here it is. I said here, well, the red circle seemed to fit in there. And then there was this distance around here that seemed to be the 0.618. If it's 1 to here, that would be 0.618 at the end. That would be 1.618. I said, geez, that's a pretty good fit. So, just recently, Danny, one of my apprentices, I just did a podcast with him recently. We'll be airing that soon on my channel. He sent me this photo just last week of quantum mechanics article research update from also 2018. So this is probably right just before or around that discovery. But I hadn't seen this image before, and he sent it to me because he's working with the golden circles, and he's really drawing all these things that I've been sharing just from watching my videos. Of course, we're working a little bit more closely and one-on-one, but he did so much just from what I share in some of the instructions in the videos. And he sent me this image because he had an eye for the golden circles, but I decided to check it out a little bit better and do a little overlay and lay out my phi calipers. And what do you know? Here are the golden circles of the seed of life that I've been sharing with all of you, right over our quantum mechanics, quantum entanglement state. So what is this diagram that I'm presenting here? Is this, I believe this is, and I think I say it in a later slide, a bit of an evolution in our sacred geometry, because at least, for the past 2,000 years, at least Western science, has really been believing in the Newtonian physics. There was no spooky action at distance. We had it all dialed in, and a lot of our sacred geometry that was done through that time as well, much of it kind of was built off of, those principles as well. But now all of a sudden, this diagram, is introducing the quantum entangled state. And just to illustrate that this is directly over top of it, I'll move that out. So it is very, I mean, as close as I could get it. Whoops, over top of that now. Let's put it back over here. So these are the same, just so you know, one's over the other, just like that. And I can undo that and put it back. And you could, you know, I mean, it might be a little, whoop, I'm all the way over there now. Let's go over here. Might be a little bit of inaccuracy to that, but you know, the lines are pretty darn close when you're dealing with phi. So anyway, and I don't, of course, know if this is just like an artistic representation of that or whatever, but you know, the other, based on this photograph here, I could see the same pattern of these two kidney bean shapes. Well, there it is. I wanted to just put it in the, here's the slide where I talk about updating the story of sacred geometry to this current science of the quantum world. Now, of course, you know, the flower of life is always meant to express that interconnectivity and wholeness, you know, at our physical level, at least. And, you know, like I was saying before, maybe there was mystics who felt there was this quantum entanglement at a distance and all sorts of amazing spiritual experiences that kind of happened. And I think that as the quantum world revolution came around in the early 1900s, it really brought that connection back to mysticisms of what they had been saying. And, you know, introduced us way past our Newtonian view. So as I say in some of my videos, I believe sacred geometry is kind of, you know, catching up to the scientific revolution. And, you know, a diagram like this, now when I draw this, I'm like, wow, I feel like I'm drawing this quantum entangled state that I can continue out these phi ratio circles at different scales and that scale invariance. And it's really giving me a very good appreciation from an artistic sense of what these scientists are talking about. So the sacred geometry is kind of this interface, as it always has been, between this kind of mystical understanding of the interconnectivity and science. And this is the language that can help bridge, as some of our scientists today are using, to make that bridge, to make these concepts applicable, you know, or understandable, let's just say, to the vast majority of the people who are not really interested in studying that to the degree that the scientists are. And besides that entanglement that's going on in this, all these other sacred geometry forms that, you know, the phi-based ones that were not being represented accurately in the other pattern, the Metatrons Cube pattern, all of a sudden are. So it's a kind of like double win-win situation here. But I just want to illustrate one other thing about this pattern is that it's not just all about this hexagon view. It's hexagon view, and this circle, this golden seed of life circle, is really an infinite implosion pattern, meaning that it will go infinitely into the center. Now, we got to remember that could be any point. Any of those circles can do that. So for instance, the center of this circle right here could start off on this circle, and we can have that happening everywhere in space. But remember, that is just one view of the major views. Now, of course, there's so many different perspectives and ways to look at things, but when you're drawing sacred geometry, these tend to be the three main ones that people tend to focus on, with just a few others. Because the techniques work well with these. And these are the ones that I primarily focus on teaching when I first introduce people to drawing sacred geometry, because I like to demonstrate that there really are a unified view, even though we call this hexagonal view. Now, this is the infinite implosion diagram of this, of the golden circles, that will go infinitely out and in for forever, infinitely. I like to illustrate here that you know, even though this is started with the seed of life pattern, really the same forms can be drawn in any of these views. See, they're not disconnected at this point. So what is the seed of life? You know, we do call it the 6 around 1, you know, 7 circles. Or if we want to draw it from this perspective, you know, we have the 10 circles around 1 here, or the, you know, 4 circles around 1 here. But you see, the point I'm trying to make here is they will draw the forms accurately in the representation, so that we can compare them amongst one another. And this is just what the scientists or the mathematicians or the great geometricians are doing, and if you visit the Wikipedia sites and they're showing you all the different perspectives of the drawings, they come from these templates. Unfortunately, they don't show you how it is they're drawing them, and that's where sacred geometry comes in, that you can use with the tools of a compass and straight edge and draw some very, very highly complex forms beyond the platonic solids and see how those are interrelated and interconnected, and not just see it as a picture on a Wikipedia page. So this is the bridge of sacred geometry. Here's just another slide from the rhombic tricontahedron implosion patterns. I've been using this one a lot recently. I'll change it up for everyone soon, but it's just illustrating that these forms of the rhombic tricontahedron, which was really kind of a very big culminating form because it includes all the platonic solids nested in there with these rhombic diamond faces that have 5 proportion to them. So in this view, it's important to realize that we're not just dealing with one cube anymore, and I'll talk about this in a moment. We're actually dealing with 5 cubes and 5-fold symmetry. And when you're dealing with 5 cubes, you're dealing with the dodecahedron and how that compounds with the icosahedron, and that creates the rhombic tricontahedron. Now, some geometers feel that that really is, the next level in our expansion in consciousness is to start to work with this rhombic tricontahedron. And well, here it is. Here it is from 3 different perspectives: the 2-fold, 5-fold, and 3-fold hexagon view, a square view, as I call them, a pentagon view, because I often get a little confused with the folds or lines of symmetry. To me, this is how I draw squares. This is how I draw pentagons or decagons, and this is how I draw, the hexagons. So next up on here is we're going to take a little bit of a turn here from this, and because I want to apply the dodecahedron in a way so you could see how it interconnects and how it really starts to become a building blocks of what I call the golden vector matrix. And I'll compare that to the isotropic vector matrix, which is very popular as the 64 tetrahedron grid. But I want to tell you that I'm about to switch views, at least for the small stellated dodecahedron. So in here, there's the dodecahedron, and this is the stellated form. This is the golden circles. So this is, remember, this is the same pattern. There's the equilateral triangles. And now I've just rotated that to the pentagon view because it was it's easier to draw in all the pieces of how they're going to link together. So that's the same thing. It has 12 points to it, and it would create the icosahedron. Now, this is our regular star tetrahedron that many of us are familiar with, the 2 equilateral triangles. This is, even though it has these equilateral triangles in it, as I'll be able to drag this over top, you see they kind of share the same geometric space pretty closely, at least the equilateral triangles. And then, of course, this is where everything gets different in the middle. So let me move that one's on top of that one. Let's get that one out of the way. Bring this one back up over here. So they're sharing the same geometric space, but remember, this is now a dodecahedron, and this would actually have, 10 tetrahedrons inside that dodecahedron down here because it has 5 cubes. So here's the 64 tetrahedron grid, and boy, I pulled up an old slide. This is probably from one of my very first videos, over a couple of years ago, at this point. So, this is when I really thought this was all that sacred geometry, at my limited perspective at the time, had to offer, because this was the hottest thing that was going on at the time. Of course, there was phi ratio talked about, but I didn't really understand how that was interconnected to all these forms. Because, as I said, when I was just working with the flower of life, and I didn't know how phi integrated in it, and I realized then after some time that it didn't, then I was pretty much working with these star tetrahedrons and putting them together into the isotropic vector matrix, the 64 tetrahedron grid, which essentially makes 1 cube. So, here's the 1 cube. It's a little, now after doing so much work with this, this is how I used to do all my old drawings, right in PowerPoint. You can see all the edges are rough because I'm just taking the lines and connecting the dots, but I did hours and hours and hours, hundreds, maybe thousands of hours of drawing stuff like this, moving these little forms around to make bigger forms. So anyway, there's 8 of these star tetrahedrons. that are coming together, meeting in the center. They're creating the cube, but they're also creating the isotropic vector matrix. Isotropic means the same measure or the same length in every direction. So all these edge lengths are the same of the tetrahedrons and how they meet at the center. At those early videos, I really liked working with the wrote in mathematics and how all the numbers would match up and everything would add up to 9 and 3 secs of 9 and all the Tesla stuff. Check out those earlier videos. They're really fun. And it was really foundational to helping me perceive sacred geometry three-dimensionally as well. So I started to wonder about, and of course, this creates the cube octahedron, the vector equilibrium that Buckminster Fuller made very popular. But I started to wonder now, well, geez, I'm working with these golden vector matrix and I'm building forms that are now not just oriented in the cube structure, one cube. My mind is now working around 5 cubes. And I'm starting to think about, well, what are these smaller units? Like is there something comparable to the star tetrahedron that's going to kind of link all together in a way that's going to, when I bring those together, we're going to get some, larger form that it creates. And yes, that started to happen, right? And I'll tell you why it started to happen is I just didn't start building with Zoom tools, as I'll show you some images in just a moment, the little connecting rods, of these little connecting rods. I just didn't start building with these and just starting to put these forms together like this. I drew them first. It came through the sacred geometry on the page. And then I said, I'll build this. And then now I go back and forth between the two. So here within this, now we're in the pentagon view, we're looking down at the top of the icosahedron and the dodecahedron, because this little conglomeration of small stellated dodeca, there's going to be 12. This is the 12 around 1. This is another version of 12 around 1. Let me just go back one slide. This is the vertices of the vector equilibrium, okay, the cube octahedron. There are 12 around 1 here, with the central point being the center. So we have 12 vertices when they all come together. Of course, we have these vertices at the top of the stars, but if we chop those off, we would have 12 around 1. And here we will have 12 small stellated dodecahedron, also around 1. Whoop, wrong one. Here we go. We're about to take that one apart. But so here's my Icosahedron dodecahedron. That one is, the vertices are given for that. And now also, here's the icosahedron that is our 20-sided D20. And here are the dodecahedron that are prior to the stellation, right? So when I remove all that stuff, you could see that the dodecahedron are actually the stellated form. I believe these are probably some never before seen drawings that you're looking at now. And this really is where sacred geometry led me to start operating through these clusters of forms, creating larger conglomerates of forms, and seeing how those stellations will come to be with the same kind of principles that were being applied to working with the cube and the star tetrahedron, although I have to do this with 5 cubes, and magically all the circle lines with the golden circles allow this to work out. Here's our 1 unit of the small stellated dodeca. Okay, so let's jump up a slide here. And I have my 12 small stellated dodecahedron, and this is part of what I call the golden vector matrix. I have another video on that with this massive dodecahedron. I'll show you at the end. I guess it's right here. That maybe will get you inspired to check that video out. And I have a little larger structure over there, which I can't even get on screen. But this is the foundation of it. So I'm about to take apart the 12 of them here, and I'll show you where they all are. So there's one. I'm just going to grab whatever wants to come off, because it does look like a lot because we're seeing all the overlapping of lines. But I built these things, or I built enough of it because I run out of Zoom tools for a while. After a while, I built enough of it to see that everything is interlocked and entwined, and things are matching up and meeting in the middle, and the vertices are meeting into the center, and it's got different rules, than working with the isotropic vector matrix. Because believe me, I built that a lot too. So it's definitely got different rules because we're working with the golden proportion throughout this whole diagram. Now, here I'm on my 12 stars. It took quite a while to put them all together like this. Here's the last one, or here's the 11th, because there's one underneath this diagram. And I'm going to do a whole other video on this. I was almost going to do a separate video on this, but I'm putting in this one just in case you've made it this far with me, and to kind of whet your appetite to the next video, because I'm going to start talking about the Icosahedron quite a lot more. That's pentagon, 12 pentagons and 20 icosahedron faces. 20 triangular faces. And it's kind of like the cube and octahedron. This is the icosahedron and dodecahedron, and this is kind of playing the same role. It's going to be a whole nother video. Got a lot on it. Very, very excited about it. It's been in production for a while. Here's the last one. Let me move the whole structure off so I can get that one out of our way, or out from underneath. And there's our form of all 12 of those. So here's our one in the middle. Now, it's not the same, but it's being created basically by all the intersection of these edges, and they all meet in the middle. Right in this core center of this icosahedron is radiating lines out into every direction. And that is going to replicate in a lot of different places, because this now is not just a one-off. You can build this all over the place. And that's why this is a golden vector matrix rather than just being a kind of isolated one-point expansion. And that's the point I wanted to make with those infinite expanding diagrams. They all look like they're coming from one point, but really each of these could be an infinite expansion point. Okay, well, I'm going to reset that so I don't have to redo it. So I'm going to go undo, undo, undo. Keep going back. Everybody's going to come back into alignment. And the 12 around one have reunited. Here are just a few of my Zoom tool models that I have my food dog in place here. Just so people know, the food dogs are in China, they have a big lion that has its hand over top of the dodecahedron. Well, I have a little, pretty decent size one in my house, not over the dodeca, the flower of life ball. It's protecting the sacred knowledge. Well, here's my pretty decent size food dog protecting this giant conglomerate of dodecahedron that are all united in this way. This is a start. The icosahedron's in there. I've got my 12 around one dodecahedron. Here's another view, more from the hexagon view. You can see them all linked up. Really simple to do. I mean, I just haven't seen anybody do it, but you just need a lot of Zoom tools, basically. But as I said, the drawings are what kind of led me to doing this. And really, I kind of ran out. I was only really able to do one of these stellations, but I replaced them and see how they all met up in the middle. This has a counterpart form, the great stellated dodeca, which I'm going to have to save for the other video. And those two integrate and combine, and they create the rhombic tricontahedron and that icosahedron. And it's all one big happy package at that point. I mean, it all just works out, and then you have basically your rhombic tricontahedron, which is this rhombic tricontahedron. This gigantic construction, when it's all done with everything that wants to happen to it, will basically create this. And then, of course, this becomes a unit that then can be built everywhere. And then you have to look at this as just one fractal little piece that has all this fractality of these same little structures going on. And then I'm just like, is there anything else more to draw or do? Because at that point, it's just too incomprehensible and too large to fathom. But all the building blocks of creation and all these other forms are being created from it, and they'll be in the other video too. Okay, so I've readjusted back to our 12 dodecahedron. Here they are. Now I'm back in the hexagon view. Here's the icosahedron. So I have that drawing too, and I wanted to kind of wrap up. This is the inner the inner lines that would be all inside the dodecahedron going to our central spot. There's two ways that I did this drawing, and one I decided to do it within the regular flower of life pattern with the golden circles. I'm going to compare and contrast these two in just a minute because, sometimes it's nice to try and fit the patterns into the pre-existing patterns, and it will work, but we have to apply the Occam's razor to just see what becomes easier to do. And what I'll illustrate here is that, I'm trying to get this dodecahedron to be in a circle, but because this circle pattern is expanding out within the same, radius between all the large circles, right? This is how the flower of life is done. Well, it kind of gets sucked in a little bit. I get all the 5 circles, but I have to add some more little circles in here to get it done. And I'll get all the lines. And it was a good amount of work to pull that one off. Then I always try out different methods. That's the nature of the game, is keep trying. Like Drunvalo's advice here, once you make a discovery, the downfall of science is you just keep going forward with that discovery. And before you know it, becomes a pattern that was kind of a wrong turn. And not to say this is a wrong turn, it just means that we kind of gave up looking. And I guess what I'm saying here is, with sacred geometry, I never give up looking because there's always much more to see from different views and perspectives and applying the circles in different ways. But what I did here was I put it in the golden circle seed of life and started to add those additional circles so that really every dodecahedron that you see, you can trace around any of them, will be contained in a large outer circle. And that now fits within the expanding version of the golden circle seed of life at the root of it. Here it is, because those will contain 6, but now I have these other ones I've got to modify, have to adapt for. And I can also do this little ring of circles along this edge, which would be a hexagon edge. And those will give me all the division lines, as you see right here, and over here, and in here, and everything works out and kind of links up. This might look like a complicated drawing to do. It certainly is not the easiest to do because, we're used to drawing, one dodecahedron or a dodecahedron in Metatrons Cube for many of us. But, it's easier to draw one dodecahedron. But see, this sacred geometry, and this is the point I'm making right back to the beginning of this video, is that because of that dodecahedron correction, it is allowing for the ability to do multiple dodecahedrons that are combining into unique ways that really I haven't seen illustrated anywhere else. And then we can stellate those and see much larger patterns and see how they all interrelate and interlock. And I would have to say that this has to be somehow related to potentially this quantum entanglement or some relationship to our universal structure, which this pattern of sacred geometries are saying should be. Because here's an icosahedron just made out of dodecahedron. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the point, 12 round 1. This is 12 dodecahedron. They would actually be entangled with one another when we actually put spheres around them, rather than just spheres bouncing up to one another. So maybe this is more entangled rather than just a world where spheres just bounce up against one another. And this is the ether. The dodecahedron is the ether. And in water, the icosahedron, is primarily our biological life and, connected to biological life. And, you're fusing the water and spirit together, and you have that's a unification of, matter and spirit together. Last image here, which I've also used quite a few times, but I'm just once again illustrating the Metatrons Cube and the difference. And I did call this Eve's icosahedron in some earlier videos to check that out, because this is the simple line drawing. I think at the time they both had 39. This 39 line version. These same amount of lines in both images. This one's done over the golden circles. This one's done either in the fruit of life pattern or within the whole circle template. Now I'm doing the same amount of lines, of course, just reiterating again, here's your 5-pointed star. You can trace it out, just draw a 5-pointed star. And if we go to do our 5-pointed star, all we do is just a kind of dead end loop here, and that's it. Now, this is why I'm saying it doesn't have phi. This is why I'm saying, this is why I'm not saying, but this is what Drunvalo said. This is why he was looking for 20 years in this pattern. Now that's 20 years of looking, trying to find this out. In the same page, the missing lines page in here, it describes how his wife at the time, his intuitive wife, who was much more into the working with the phi ratio and doing some amazing patterns. He told her all about this, and within 3 days, she was already starting to produce dodecahedron-like designs, because it's a more feminine type of sacred geometry. This is what I call this, and this is why I called this Eve's icosahedron back then, because this nature component of the phi ratio, this kind of imperfection, these little imperfections of life that we're introducing into this with the phi ratio, are actually the thing that is giving us the creative driving force of life, and that helps it evolve with that icosahedron and dodecahedron. Some of the other patterns that are contained in this, we've got, this major standbys in the Metatrons Cube, of course, of the cube, octa, and tetra, the cube, octahedron, rhombic, dodecahedron, and a couple other truncations that we can do within this pattern. And there are ways to try and, work in the phi ratio, but I've recently been seeing some people just happening to put a phi ratio circle in there because they're seeing that that's the missing key, really, in order to really do this in here. And then they're drawing basically a icosahedron on here that really doesn't have any connection to the pattern here. Like it's not really given by the lines, it's not given by the circles, but this one over here does that, and all the Kepler points. So, star polyhedra are down in here. I did Dan Winter's star mother model, and I did 5D 4D dodecaplex over here, right? This is the dodecahedron 4D version. Here's the 600 cell, the 4D icosahedron. And then, we've got all these other forms going on here. So this is some Dan Winters. I got a star mother video, Metatron's tetraplex video, check that out. And the video of Eve's icosahedron. He's going to talk about that line pattern. And I have one that was done on Christmas Eve. That's this past Christmas Eve, that just shows you how to do the line pattern just in a couple minutes. So you can draw that out yourself. It's all right there for you. And, if this pattern is just enough to get out there, and it takes 20 or 30 or 40 years, of influence, then I feel like there may be more of a bright future for the geometers in the future, because they'll be able to find all this other stuff on their own without anybody else having to show them, or anybody doing anything I'm doing my videos, because it's the patterns themselves that hold those root foundations of creativity and exploration. It's all contained within that seed. It just matters how it's going to evoke any particular individual, of how it's going to ignite their seed interest of how sacred geometry takes them on a journey. But this is, at least for me, a good start that led me on the path. So let's see. Let me just, give a little plug for Drunvalo's book again. Here it is. Check it out. I would say definitely continue to read all of the great content in it. Purchase it. There's so many great concepts that have led many geometers on amazing journeys. It's 2 volumes. And like I said, no disrespect to Drunvalo and his awesome work and what he's done for sacred geometry and bringing it to the broader public and all the geometers that have followed in his footsteps. And also always test out everything that you see in all these books. Start to develop an eye for seeing the difference in the dodecahedron and icosahedron as I'm describing it, and get some hands-on application of drawing it, because then you can really get a feel for it. And that's really what's important, is just get a feel of the drawing for you. If you really love drawing the dodecahedron as a Metatrons Cube, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, that's, how it moves you. And, be open to exploring some other options and alternatives and playing around with some other things. But this is a video I have called the golden matrix of infinity. This is the large dodecahedron of, what is there, 20 dodecahedron in this, and they're creating the rhombi Icosahedron dodecahedron in there, all the way down to a little cube at the center. So check out that video if you're, and I got little things growing off the side there because I'm always working on expanding and seeing what else could come out of it. So that would be from that hexagon view like that. Now this is a slightly different one I showed you in the video, but it's only one of the many, many possibilities that exist. And I hope that you enjoyed this video. I have a Patreon site that you can check out where I'm teaching people to draw these at a step-by-step little guide that I'm working on. And that's coming out in little 4 or 5 page segments once a month. And I have a drawing class associated with that in the different tiers. And also I have an apprenticeship, an 8-week apprenticeship. I take people on one-on-one mentorships and work specifically on their own interests. So there's really a lot of possibilities and options. If you want to work specifically with me on sacred geometry, please subscribe to my channel. Always interesting, more good content. There's always something new coming out. And recently I've been thinking I'll start to be sharing just some of the basic drawing techniques and many, many more drawings to get you started here. And I do already have a drawing section on this channel. So yes, much love and appreciation. I hope you really enjoyed that. And please share your thoughts and comments in the comment section of YouTube. And have a blessed day. Peace.